good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. This is the latest Mobliciti webcast. We're going to be talking about the realities of home working this time. And I guess you'd have to say that the elephant on the table, the elephant under the table, the elephant in the room has to be, of course, the current pandemic, where all of a sudden, lots and lots of us are working from home and we're discovering the advantages, the opportunities, but also the challenges therein. With me for the discussion today, I'm delighted to say I've got Andy Brown. Andy's the CTO at Mobliciti. Andy, welcome along.
Hello.
And second, we have Ian Dobson. Ian is the EMEA Head of Digital Workspace at the Japanese financial giant Nomura. Ian, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Well, look, let's look at the state of the nation a bit. Andy, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you whether it's a case of the cobbler's shoes or not. How has Mobliciti been dealing with the pandemic and the lockdown and everyone working from home?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time for sure. I think fortunately for Mobliciti, we were pretty much 100% in the cloud as an organization already, and pretty much everyone in the organization already had access to carry out compute capability, if you like. And so in effect, what we did was just invoke our business continuity plan, which was, shut up shop and everybody carry on working from home. And on the whole, that's been pretty successful. Sort of day one, there were not too many issues at all. It was surprising how smooth it was, and a general acceptance from everybody that they just kind of mucked in and got on with it. So yeah, on the whole, it's been a positive experience. I think, as with all these things, we'll probably cover this a bit more, but it's the longer it goes on, the more interesting challenges start to arise in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ian, how's it being at Nomura? You're obviously a very federated, global, presumably dispersed type of organization. Is it being different for you?
It's been different, obviously, because we're 17,000 users and obviously a little bit bigger than Mobliciti and regulated. So that really was a challenge for us. Is from a platform point of view and the infrastructure we had, it worked. It was fine. We got people, it all scaled up. Our messaging platforms have all coped well. Our remote solutions have all worked well. Some of the issues we had is we didn't realise the number of people who had no means to log in remotely from home. We just assumed that everybody would have a laptop or a PC. But it turns out most people these days have a tablet or a phone and not necessarily a PC. So we had to do a big case, and obviously all companies do at the same time procuring equipment to send to people's homes to get them up and working. Getting traders working, so obviously traders are regulated, they need to be recorded. Mobile phones need to be recorded, so we did a lot of work about getting remote turrets to people's houses, a full trader setup. So it was those use cases that we weren't quite ready for with the traders, and no one expected traders to work from home. I don't think many banks expected this to happen like this, that traders would be potentially permanently working from home. So we did a lot of work up front. But that said, we were very successful in getting people working. We got everyone in probably 2 weeks, the entire bank back up working remotely, everyone logging in. This is globally as well. Remember, this is across the world we had to do this. So it's certainly been exciting. I've got a few more grey hairs. But to Andy's point, I 100% agree with him. Now we're finding, I think it's week 12 now for us, it is the new normal, and we're actually looking strategically at this and how our business is going to operate, the technologies that we're delivering, collaboration, and also upskilling our staff. So we're trying to do a lot of training and sessions to tell people how to get the best out of the technologies that we're delivering. You can sometimes forget that users need some help to learn how to use stuff. So yeah, it's been an exciting but challenging time, I think is the best I can say.
Yeah, it's interesting. You call it the new normal, and of course we're hearing that phrase a lot at the moment, but Twitter has basically already said you never have to come back to the office. You wouldn't want to be buying shares in WeWork at the moment, would you?
I find that quite surprising. What we found is there's people that absolutely love working from home. There's other people that absolutely loathe working from home. So, but culturally, you've got to look at where that fits in with your company and your culture and your business.
I totally agree with that. I'd also add that the reality right now is that people are still adapting to the demands on the business in terms of revenue coming in the door and everything else. If you look at the wider market, it's not as simple as, if you're a technology firm, perhaps like, a Twitter or a Google or whatever, where you kind of got the revenues are reasonably solid no matter what, you can perhaps make that choice more easily. But I think at the moment, a lot of companies are, they've got bigger fish to fry in terms of the future of the business itself, rather than thinking about long-term strategy for where our staff are going to reside. Not to say they're not taking notice of what's going on, but perhaps a bit too soon sometimes to get too bold in that area.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because offices aren't going to go away tomorrow. Working from home isn't going to go away after this ends, but there will be some sort of new consensus. And the number of companies I've spoken to through this, spoken to many CIOs at all sorts of different companies, not just tech companies. And I think their feeling is, though, they will bias more towards working from home than they did previously. They've been satisfied with the experience. The employees have been potentially happier in many cases, although, of course, we've all had to deal with things like family care, childcare, extended family, education, and so on. But I feel that there is going to be a change in mood, which is less of a prejudice against remote and home working. Are you getting that from your clients, Andy?
I think so. There's been some interesting observations that I've seen. Some are more negative than others, but I thought an interesting point that was made was previously remote working was almost like you were the outsider and everyone else was in the room and you were the outsider outside of the room. And so you didn't feel as connected to it all. And of course, at the moment, it's very egalitarian. Everybody's in the same boat. And so kind of everybody's more accepting of it. And indeed, for some, they're preferring it as a working experience. But, the big question is what happens when the office actually is open and people are able to work reasonably normally back at the office? Will people go back to the way they were? I don't personally think that it's going to just go back to exactly how it was. I think this concept of new normal does mean that whatever we go back to will be different. I don't think what we're in now is the new normal either. It's probably a hybrid somewhere between the two. I mean, already seeing surveys coming out, in some sectors where there's basically about 50% of users are saying they would like to continue with a lot more home working, but that's still an awful lot of people who don't clearly want to stay doing this long term. And that's personal circumstance as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think what your last comment there is personal circumstances. What we've done at Nomura, we've got to take people on the journey with us, wherever that leads, whether it's 50% on site, hot desking, whatever real estate strategies. We can't just do broad brush, like I said about Twitter. We have to get people to engage with it. Staff surveys. We're doing a lot about looking at people's home equipment now and what we can do to make that working experience better at home, asking people. We've done a lot of work around wellness and people's support to do that. So technology-wise, we can absolutely set up remote working, we can do office working, we can have all the technology in place, we can do that. But we've got to do what's right for our users and for our staff. So we're doing a lot to make sure everyone feels like they're involved with that decision.
Yeah, sure. Well, you're the perfect person to ask in that case, Ian, because I'm going to say, what are the challenges? I know companies like Google and Sage, for example, Sage issued Headspace apps, so well-being type of phone app for employees. Both of those companies, I think, issued ergonomic furniture or released budget for employees to buy things. It's more than just having a fat pipe broadband connection. What are the challenges employees have told you they're facing when they're working from home?
I think you've got the obvious childcare issues, and the number of people that aren't as fortunate as I am to have a home office and they're working on a kitchen table, especially looking at this globally. In certain countries, it's a different way. In Tokyo, for example, it's obviously a very large city. A lot of our employees work in small apartments with their families because of the cost of housing out there. So you've got to try and weigh that up globally and adapt to that. So there's no one size fits all. We obviously do. We have relationships with Aviva, who's our healthcare partner. So we have a lot of pastoral care that we can give people, numbers they can phone. We're over communicating, so we're doing lots of phone calls with people, making sure we're checking in with people, because I think that's an easy thing as a manager, is you can forget to talk to everyone. So, for example, for me on a Friday afternoon, I'll call around a few people, more junior people who probably I don't interact with as much, just to make sure they're doing okay. What can we do? Are they feeling any stress? And I find that a really, really constructive way to help out.
Yeah, I'd chip in on that as well and say, I think one of the things that's starting to become apparent as people do this longer term is there's a danger that you lose the sense of community within an organisation, with everybody sitting in their own room. They're actually very productive working in solo, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, all those kind of what the Americans would call the water cooler moments, where there's that discussion that was by the side of the desk and, the overheard conversation that resulted in something else happening, and all that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. And I think, one of the things that we found quite powerful inside Mobliciti was to try and keep the community going, was just something really simple, like, a Zoom call that was actually not for a specific purpose as such, other than it was there for everybody's just on it, and everybody's able to just chat and bounce off each other. And we call it Beer Friday. In fact, it's coming up in a little while. And that's just quite powerful, because you don't get that kind of conversational flow otherwise.
No, you're absolutely right, and you have to force yourself to do it. You have to do it. So some people loathe it, like 50-50 people that turn their cameras on and don't turn their cameras on. It's that kind of thing. But you have to try and do it. We've done, obviously, I think most companies have done it, the virtual quiz for the whole company, which was really successful. So people enjoying that just to try and bring that sense of community. And funnily enough, I was asked to do an internal presentation about my working from home, and I said exactly that is those water cooler moments that we miss. We're missing those. Some of the best ideas we've had have come from an impromptu conversation, and we're missing that. We need to think about how we're going to capture that. How are we going to start doing that again? Because we're not going to go back to fully working in the office, I don't think, anytime soon. So, and we don't want to lose that. That's, like I say, some of the best ideas come from those moments.
Agreed.
Yeah, well, you're the head of digital workspaces for EMEA at Nomura, and of course, for years now, decades even, many companies have tried to build workspaces that create those water cooler moments, the moments where you interact with people. They almost force it on you. The comfortable environment, the best coffee, the best gummy bears, or the best candy rooms, and all of this kind of thing. It's become a little world of architecture in its own right. I mean, do you feel that is going to change as well, Ian? There was an article yesterday, and I think it was the New York Times, about how companies like Salesforce.com, Mark Benioff was quoted saying, well, obviously things like shared eating areas they've got to be very careful with, and meeting rooms with too many people in. That's going to have a knock-on impact as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, shared restaurants, shared eating, even down to meeting rooms, that you can't have more than one person in a meeting room anymore. So for Nomura, it's about, and our chief executive in Japan at an investor day, which is public, said it's about collaboration and making sure we give people the tools to be able to collaborate. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to move people out of email and WebEx into a Teams kind of suite. So, but for me, the technology we can deploy is getting people to use it and educating our users about how to use spaces and collaborating in that way. Because for non-technologists, and even technologists, to be fair, people struggle with that concept. People have been using email for 20 years and they work out of their email. It's getting people out of that to be able to collaborate more as teams. That's a big challenge for us.
Totally agree with that. I think it's been fascinating how, many organizations have actually had video conferencing capability in place for probably a decade or more now, but actually it's been a tool that predominantly was used by IT and not by the business, if you want to use that phrase. And actually, one of the really fascinating things that's come out of this whole lockdown scenario is, one of the big stories is obviously the growth of Zoom in the market. It's actually a business tool that's gone into the consumer market in effect. And there's obviously been a lot of press, good and bad, that's come out of that. But they've had a massive growth surge. But what's actually happened is it's created an acceptance of video communication in personal lives that's been brought across into the work life as well. And just literally to the point where it wasn't that long ago, you would very rarely see someone with their webcam on, for example, know what kind of room they were sat in. Whereas now it's actually very normal for a meeting to start with people commenting on something in the background, or, the whole conversation around something that's actually quite personal. It's your space. It's fascinating how it's kind of opened up that world, and users, staff, call it what you will, I suppose, are much more accepting of technology all of a sudden, and indeed actually quite appreciative of it sometimes.
Yeah, that whole world of Zoom quizzing and then translating into virtual cabinet meetings, slightly scary, because, things like the meeting numbers displayed on screen and so on, there's some real rookie errors made out there as well. But, Ian, you talked a lot about softer issues, which was very nice. I think in technology, we're often accused of not thinking about the softer issues, the human-centric issues, but the challenges of home working from your point of view. Some of them are practical, of course. I think we all wish we'd had a little bit more broadband provision than at the beginning of the lockdown, for example. But tell me a little bit about security as well, because obviously you're in a highly regulated financial services world. The world generally is highly regulated at the moment. Has security been a headache for you, as so many of your staff work from home?
I think security is always a headache. It's at the forefront of everything we do, and the number one is cyber. So I don't think it's changed. I think it's one of those things on the pandemic and response, is that it hasn't really changed too much for us. Obviously, you'd expect quite mature IT security function and platforms. And what we have done, and what has really helped us, is, again, back to education. We do ethical phishing tests to people over the last probably 2 years, really got our users to understand about not clicking on links and putting the whole emphasis, because that is our weakest point, is our employees who clicking on a link and letting someone in. So especially when you're remotely as well, and you may not be as diligent as you would be when you're in your office environment. So we've done a lot of that. We put the mobile threat detection Imperium onto all our devices for BYD and corporate. So I think we was in a good space with security. Obviously, we've got to look at that and how we deliver our services. But generally, our users are very educated on cybersecurity, and that's really good to see. We actually ran a campaign last week, ethical phishing again, and the stats of who clicked the link is really was positive. I can't say what it was, but it's a very high number who reported it, saw it was a spam, and these are sophisticated ones we're doing now, not just text-based ones. We're really making them branded and look the real thing, and it's good to see that our users are learning from that.
Yeah, what about from your point of view, Andy?
It's an interesting one. I suppose one of the things that for a lot of organisations, they had a remote access capability, and that had obviously been through security due diligence as part of the deployment of it. I think that the challenges at the moment are often around ones of scale and time, in that the solution was built for X and it's currently running at many times X, and indeed it's now supporting everyone all the time, and I think we're starting to see the beginnings of some challenges from a security perspective, where things like a laptop perhaps was designed with the expectation that it would be back to base on a fairly regular basis, not permanently living outside of the network, can potentially give you some interesting challenges on patching. Do you do patching over your VPN connections, all those kinds of things? These are the kind of headaches that only come out after a while because you didn't realize you had the problem. Another one that's often talked about at the moment is the security of the home environment itself. All organizations are effectively relying on capabilities that were present in people's homes in the first place. But quite often, from a security angle, that's actually a bit of a horror show. The router that's provided by the ISP, that's actually not a particularly expensive device. Is it patched? Is it up to date? Generally, the answer is going to be possibly not. And will the user even know? Most people don't even look at their broadband router with a view to, do I keep that up to date or anything like that? And these are the sort of challenges that, as with all things, over time, bad actors will ultimately look for the weakest links and go after that point to attack. And that's one of the big trends that's starting to emerge, is home networking is potentially the weakest link, which of course all corporate devices are now sat on. And there's already the beginnings of some security researchers saying, well, what's going to happen when all these devices finally come back to base, and what have they got on them, and etc. So it's going to be an interesting space in the market for a little while yet, for sure.
Yeah, patching is one for us. We are going to explode, I think, on our laptop estate from where we are now. So it's how do you patch those things? And also for us, it's like you say, it's the Internet of Things. We've done a conference to all staff just this week around Amazon devices. We're recommending you, if you're in a confidential meeting, obviously we have some extremely confidential meetings happening now from people's homes, is you turn off those devices. You turn off the speakers on those devices. So we're actively encouraging people to do that. It's not a massive threat as now, but it's getting people to think in that way about their home network. And it's the last mile, the biggest thing for us at the moment. And I've talked about it, is this last mile, the home network. How do we support it? How do we look after it? There's so many unknowns with broadband speed and Wi-Fi networks. Do people have mesh networks? Should we give people mesh networks? All those kinds of discussions that didn't really happen at the start of the pandemic, but now after 12 weeks is actively on everyone's mind, and how we're going to do this long term, because I don't think it's going back to how it was before.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's a common thread we're speaking to a lot of customers at the moment about, is there's a realization that just piggybacking over the network that is there, that can work perfectly fine. Sometimes it works absolutely brilliantly, but the problem is you have zero visibility over what's going on that network. It is that visibility of the last mile. And sometimes that may be a challenge with the speed of the broadband itself. Sometimes that can just be the fact that people at home tend to be sharing the home with other people who are also stuck in their house. And, the classic use case being kids who are online gaming or 4K streaming Netflix or whatever it may be. Totally unrelated, the IT team are getting a support call coming in saying, my laptop's not working and it dropped out in the middle of an important call and blah, blah, blah. And actually it's nothing to do with the IT team, but they can't see anything specifically wrong at the back end with the application. So this is a common thread. I think, as Ian kind of alluded to, there's a growing realization that this isn't for the short term. This is going to be for a while now. And actually, we're starting to see sort of two-pronged thought process on this around, we need to be able to A, have visibility of what's going on, but also B, we need to be able to start to guarantee that what we need for work isn't contaminated or cross-polluted with everything else that's going on in the home. And so, yeah, I suppose the big area that's certainly become exceptionally hot right now is the provision of 4G or 5G home working networking, where we can just stick something into the house. It's a managed router. We've got visibility over and monitor it. We give you SLAs over fixing it. And also, obviously, for the user themselves, they've got something that is for work, and that's all.
So once 5G, we're going to see a big shift around. I think the new HP Dragonflies have 5G built into them now and really changed the way we deliver our services. Do you give people that data card to do it?
I personally think 5G will be amazing, but it's only useful as a service really once it's reasonably ubiquitous in terms of coverage. And the reality is that we're years away from that yet. For the time being, though, what we are seeing is 4G coverage is surprisingly good, even in areas that are actually quite rural and sometimes black spots for broadband. You know, the classic VIP use case that we hear a lot is some of your most senior people or your most important users tend to live in the middle of nowhere. They have the big mansions in the middle of nowhere where they have terrible connectivity. Ironically, this can be a case where 4G is actually more than good enough, and we're able to do solutions with things like antennas, external antennas, things like that, to really dig out a quality signal and get a good service.
Yeah, we've absolutely sent Wi-Fi devices out to our senior executives around the country. So yeah, and it is, and you're right, it is really surprising how good 4G can be.
Yeah, it's good enough for now, for sure.
Yeah.
So many unknown factors. I saw Ofcom telling people to switch microwave ovens off to improve the Wi-Fi connectivity. Certainly telling kids we've got 6 Alexa devices around the house, so they can suck up a lot even if they're not being currently used. Laptops and tablets being left on. We're all learning a lot about connectivity. Let me ask you a quick one on that. Do you see that becoming increasingly part of the CIO role? Typically, we've provisioned laptops, we've provisioned tablets and smartphones. Connectivity is often being more of a case of help yourself when you're at home, and people have gone with consumer offerings. Do you see that becoming a bigger part of the CIO job?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can't have traders that can't trade because of something outside of our control. So we need to look at a home managed network kind of option potentially for that. I think for 90% for, say, IT corporate users, they can take a hit every so often if their broadband goes down. But for our revenue generators, obviously, we need that critical service. We've even thought lease lines into people's houses, dedicated routers, us buying stuff. So I see a big shift in market for that. I think I don't know many companies that offer that kind of thing at the moment, but I could see that's absolutely something that maybe BT or one of the big players goes down that kind of route. A bit like I'm obviously an industry veteran. I remember when we first started, I used to have companies would put ice gen lines into my house because you wanted that speed. So yeah. I can see it going back to that kind of thing where you have your own managed part of the house that is for your corporate. Very difficult to manage like that. Big lot of questions that creates.
Yeah, and it's almost gone full circle that, not so very long ago, businesses would put broadband into people's homes for work purposes, because that was the first time anyone in the home had actually needed the broadband connection. So the phone line was there for voice and that was personal, but the broadband was for work purposes. Obviously now that's totally flipped on its head, and pretty much every line into a home, quite often it's primarily for home broadband, and phone just happens to be on it as well. Yeah. Which means that the challenge is now one of, you can't just piggyback on the bit of copper that was already there. You've got to actually start thinking about putting another connection into the property, which is certainly doable. And I think we will see more of that coming now, unfortunately. But it's just the logistics of doing it. You've got engineers going up poles or digging up gardens or whatever it may be, which is going to be fun times ahead if we do it over the wire, for sure.
Generally, our users do have good internet speeds. There's obviously some use cases out there that they've got terrible ones, but the biggest problem we found is people's Wi-Fi networks. If you invest in a decent mesh network, that absolutely helps. A lot of people think it's because of their broadband speed that they're having issues, but probably 90% of the times we've spoken to our users, it's been because We've got 17 tablets going, 2 washing machines, a fridge, Alexa devices, all of that. There you go. There's my Alexa in the background. All going at the same time. And if you can put decently invest in that network, and whether that's the user that has to do that or the corporate does that, I think that's a big win for us.
Totally agree. And it kind of comes back to the point that very often most home networks are running on the piece of kit that was given to them by the broadband provider. Quite often they've never changed the passwords, they've never even changed the SSIDs. And sometimes those devices are getting on as well. You know, they can be quite old. If they've not done any upgrades or any changes of provider, you can be running on a router that's nearly a decade old.
All over the world now, people listening to this podcast are making a note to change the SSID and the password on the router. So, if we've done it no other good. We are running out of time a little bit. We could talk about this for a long, long time. But let me ask one more, maybe Ian and then Andy, and then I'll throw it open for final thoughts, if you will. Then Ian, from your point of view, this creation of digital workspaces, places that make it easier for companies to hire and retain talented people, for them to be innovative, to get the best out of them, to make them happy, content, in a state of well-being, so they deliver their best work without compromise. Do you also see that maybe to a certain extent that's going to be another task for the CIO or the CD or some other person within the organization to help people work from home and create, not just have the equipment, but an environment that's conducive? I'm thinking about screens, I'm thinking about design of workspaces and so on. Could that be yet another wave as we learn more and more about working from home in these strange times?
Yes, so we've actually found quite a lot from our research around screen size. The silly one is obviously most of our users have at least 2 screens, some 4, some 8 screens on their desks, and obviously that's not doable at home. You just haven't got the space to do it. So we've done a lot of recommending. We started with a 24-inch monitor, and then we realised actually that's not really good for working from home. It's too small when you're multitasking and Windows and copying between Excel and PowerPoint and something like that. So we now recommend 27-inch screens. We're just about to do a staff survey so we can really understand about what our users have at home and how that's work is looking. Obviously, you've got the whole real estate aspect as well of it. A number of people I see sitting on a garden chair, which cannot be healthy for your back. So I think employees have a responsibility to that working from home. So there's a raft of not just technology considerations, insurance, all that kind of stuff, tax implications if someone's working in a different country. There's all these kinds of questions that people are learning very quickly that we've got to get answers to them very quickly. So, and IT is obviously centre to most of those conversations as well. So it's a challenging time for us.
I agree with a lot of those points. I think we're seeing a lot of this whereby it's not a one-size-fits-all solution by any measure, because we go from everything where people have got dedicated office space to people perched on the end of a bed, all the way through to I've got an engineer who's, in order to find a quiet space, has been working in a garage because that's the quietest space in his house, because he's been sharing a house with lots of other people, and he's trying to get on with his job, and fair play to him, he's gone out and worked in a garage. So I think we're starting to see all sorts of things will fall out of this. Everything from, there's a concept in many organizations of something like a London waiting, or rates of pay in London will be higher than in other areas of the UK. Well, clearly that all becomes a bit of a nonsense if everybody's remote all of the time. And how's that going to work? In terms of the workspace itself, I mean, one of the things that we found was really quite powerful as a tool was just asking staff to send a picture of their workspace, because it becomes immediately apparent what the challenges are that they may be facing, because it isn't as simple as just shipping them a piece of kit. You might need to ship them something much more fundamental, like a desk and a chair. That's more powerful than giving them a bigger screen for the time being. So yeah, it's clearly going to evolve over time for sure.
Yeah, as I say, we've taken up our allotted time, but I do want to come back to you and say, what have I failed to ask you, and what's on the tip of your tongue and you wanted to get out, lessons learned or best practices, as we've all had to improvise in this time? Maybe Ian first and then Andy.
I think we've learned flexibility is key. I never assume. We assumed a lot that people are in technology and embrace technology like we do, and they don't. So probably one learning curve for us is education. We need to be quick to tell people how to use these products. To Andy's point about impromptu conversations, people don't have someone sitting on the next desk to ask how they can do something now. So we've really got to give everyone tools to be able to do that. We've rolled out Pluralsight, if you're familiar with that platform, for learning and development. So So around educating our users has been a big one. Like I said, our technology stood up well. It handled the extra capacity. It was absolutely fine, but it's looking at next step for us is how our users are consuming our technology remotely. And from a healthcare point of view, I strongly believe you can't just use a broad brush with people working from home, not working from home. I think I was quite surprised that most of the staff that want to come back into the office are the younger staff. And I think my perception was that they would be the ones that are working in a coffee shop, they're working from home. But when you think about it, they haven't built their network up. So they need that time early in their career to get their reputation, build their network with people. And that's really challenging to do when you're working from home. So it's all that kind of stuff that's really coming out in the wash now, 12 weeks later. So I think you're in for an interesting 12 months, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the interesting thing, I suppose, is a lot of the conversation about the response to COVID has been around technology, interestingly. It's been a very technology-led response to it, and people are relying on technology far more than they ever did before, just for the day-to-day running of the business. And so I think there's this assumption that technology is also the savior and is going to solve all the problems that are now coming to light. And that's true. There is technology that we can throw at this. And as Ian alluded to, we need to be able to make sure that not only is it thrown over the fence, but actually the user adoption piece is looked at. But I think there's also a reality of businesses themselves are adapting to this new way of working too. This is a whole new world for everyone, not just in the technology space. And some of this is as much around business process re-engineering as much as it is about the technology to solve the challenge today.
Yeah, thanks so much, gentlemen. You said earlier, the importance of over-communicating, as you put it, and education. I think we're all learning that. It's a soft challenge and it's a hard challenge. It's a challenge everyone's addressing and getting through. So I'm really delighted to hear best practices from you, Andy, and from you, Ian. That's the end of this Mobliciti podcast. Please do join us next time, and we'd love to hear any feedback you have. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.